Well, welcome back to the plagiarism controversy and the Walt Brown controversy as we go through the documents. I hope you're learning as much as you can, as much as I am. It's been quite a journey. And right now we're going to go see what Walt Brown himself had to write about this. This is going to be, let's see, make sure you can see what I see. And again, we're just going to go through this so you can know how to get these documents yourself. Go into hydroplate.org. And then you're going to see hydroplate resources, go down to hydroplate controversy. And then up at the top, you're going to see the hydroplate timeline that I encourage you to do. And then from the timeline, you can take a walk down memory lane, go through the arbitration and the mediation, and then how Pastor Lee gets involved. And then also there's this Jeremy Schuler. Let's see, we might be getting, oh, this is it right here. This is where we're going to be. This is, and then you can just click what you want, and there it is, Brown's 8th edition and notes. Okay, this is from his 8th edition. This is from his book. I prefer to read it out of the book, so here we go. Okay, so this is 2000. When was this? I'm sorry. This was 8th edition, December 1st, 2008. All right, here we go. Down here we go. Okay, this is what Walt Brown says on his endnote 34. Okay, make this readable, a little bit more shrinky. There, this might work. Okay, there we go. Okay, this is from his In the Beginning, copyright 2008, I believe. And this is going to be, I first proposed the hydroplate theory in 1972. So think about that, 53 years ago. 53 years ago, this theory's been kicked to the curb. Okay. In the fall of 1988, I described in lectures and radio broadcasts on more than 100 different stations the location of the former, now extinct Grand Lake and how I believe its breaching formed the Grand Canyon. After a year of study and field work in Arizona, Utah, and Colorado, I located the lake's boundaries using geological and topographical features. This explanation for the Grand Canyon was published for the first time in July of 1989. And another extinct lake, Hopi Lake, has been described earlier. And Dr. Steve Austin of the Institute for Creation Research, as he eventually admitted in writing, purchased the 5th edition of In the Beginning in August of 1989, a few weeks after it was published. Austin personal correspondence. In early 1990, Austin published, as if it were his, some key ideas of mine concerning Grand Lake and the formation of the Grand Canyon. I learned this on May 7th, 1990, but said nothing to anyone about it for 3 years. On November 4th, 1990, 2 people told me that Austin on the previous day had publicly said I had taken those ideas from him. Again, I kept silent. But by mid-June 1993, so 3 years later, 2.5 years later, I realized that Austin's false allegations against me were spreading and starting to hurt others. Austin was also the unnamed geologist mentioned in endnote 146. For example, in September of 1992, Dr. Robert V. Gentry filmed me at the Grand Canyon presenting the Grand Lake explanation as part of a professional and very expensive video production. Then on June 10th, 1993, Gentry told me that Dr. Russell Humphreys, who had worked closely with Austin and is now at ICR, was reporting that I had plagiarized ideas from Austin's. Humphreys later wrote that he did not use the word plagiarize, but Gentry insists that's what was the intended meaning. Gentry told Humphreys that he did not believe that was true, but Gentry was naturally concerned about the consequences of those allegations for his production, so he appealed for me to help. I then realized that the issue had to be addressed. By the way of background, geologists have known since at least 1861 that canyons can be carved by the breaching of a lake. Hart's Brents in 1923 have the discoveries of Harlan Brents in 1923 have shown generations of undergrad geology students how a breaching lake can produce canyons in weeks. In early 1980, Austin and many others saw that a small lake at Mount St. Helens had breached and that the escaping water had quickly carved a small canyon. In 1985, John H. Whitmore, a student of Austin's, wondered if in a term paper of Hopi Lake, the extinct but previously discovered lake directly east of the Grand Canyon, could have breached the Kaibab Plateau and carved the Grand Canyon. That would have been highly unlikely because, one, the Kaibab Plateau is about 2,000 feet higher than the lake could have been. Two, the water would have had to penetrate through 30 miles of hard rock that was denser than concrete. And three, an spillage down such a gradual slope to the west would erode little. In 1986, Dr. Edmund W. Holroyd told Austin that if a dam were built across the Colorado River near Grand Canyon Village, a very large lake would form. Its area would have included and been larger than the combination of both Hopi Lake and what I later identified as Grand Lake. Holroyd drew this big lake on a map and noted that some thought that if a very long east-west fault that had developed between what is now the north and south rims of the Grand Canyon, the lake's escaping water might have carved the Grand Canyon. However, such an east-west fault has never been found, and faults in the Grand Canyon region typically run perpendicular to the canyon, not parallel. Furthermore, a canyon that eroded along a fault would not bend or meander as the Grand Canyon does. The work of Newberry and Brents and the ideas of Whitmore and Holroyd led Austin to wonder in a very tentative way, as his writings show, that if the breaching of Hopi Lake directly east of the Grand Canyon had carved the Grand Canyon, any proposed suggestion that the Grand Canyon was carved when Hopi Lake breached would contain serious flaws, such as those mentioned above, which Austin knew. He did not realize that a much larger and separate lake was once north of Hopi Lake. Austin was never able to provide any spoken or written record showing that he knew before 1989 anything about Grand Lake, yet in 1990, he published a map remarkably similar to the one I had published in 1989, showing, as he labeled it, Grand Lake. In 1988, I had discovered not only the boundaries of that extinct lake, but also its breach point. I had named the lake Grand Lake. When Grand Lake breached, the escaping torrent of water quickly brought about the breaching of the western end of Hopi Lake as well. Both breach points are easily seen at the extreme north and south ends of Marble Canyon. I call the north breach point where Grand Lake spilled the funnel. It is shown on page 196 to 98. 198, the southern breach point where Hopi Lake spilled is marked by the unique terrain where the Little Colorado River enters the Colorado River. After both lakes were breached, the escaping waters and ensuing events formed the Grand Canyon in weeks and upwarped the Kaibab Plateau. This chapter presents 24 other evidences which I gathered over the year's time, 1988 and 1989, that supported the Grand Lake explanation. The chapter, The Hydroplate Theory, an overview on page 107 to 144, and the chapters on liquefaction and limestone fit together other necessary pieces of the puzzle. What produced all the sediment? What layered the strata and sorted the fossils? What cemented the rocks so uniformly? Why does the Grand Canyon expose so much limestone? And what were the forces, energies, and mechanisms that lifted the Rocky Mountains and raised the Colorado Plateau so high? Today's Grand Canyon would not exist if the Colorado Plateau had not first risen more than a mile above sea level. If the Grand Canyon is a consequence of a global flood, where did all the water come from, and where did it go afterwards? Any attempt to explain the Grand Canyon without answering these broad questions is shallow at best. And of course, any explanation that is not accompanied by definite predictions is hollow. After pondering Bob Gentry's appeal for me to respond to Humphrey's allegations, I realized I had to go to the source and address Austin's spreading accusations. If I had simply been seeking priority over a lake's name, as some have implied, I would have done so years earlier. So on June 18th, 1993, I wrote Austin explaining the seriousness of the matter and asked if these stories I had heard were true. The same day, I also wrote ICR's then director, Dr. Henry M. Morris, now deceased, to inform him of this issue. In all, Morris, Austin, and I exchanged 6 letters during the summer of 1993. Austin always denied that he had accused me of plagiarism, although I explained how he could contact the witnesses who heard him and were shocked by what he had said. He never contacted those witnesses. He also denied taking any ideas of mine, even though some of the new details he had published were so specific that they obviously had come from my work. Map makers usually place on their maps tiny, unique details, even intentional errors, so that anyone who copies the map will be clearly shown to be guilty of copyright infringement. Austin tried in several deceptive ways to show that he had come up with the Grand Lake explanation first. All were easily shown to be false, as a reader of our correspondence clearly shows. All relevant correspondence is posted at calvarypo.org and also hydroplate.org. Also available is a booklet published by Pastor Kevin Lee and Diego Rodriguez, which analyzes and dissects all the correspondence and other documents and events pertaining to this dispute. And take a break. It was called Canyonlands Lake, a monument to plagiarism, I believe that's what it was called. Okay. Going on here now, by August 19th, 1993, it was clear that we would not be able to resolve the issue ourselves, so I proposed in a letter to Morris and Austin that we put this messy matter into the hands of an independent Christian arbitrator to thoroughly study and resolve. Morris and Austin flatly refused. Denials and bobbing and weaving continued. Finally, after we had exchanged 13 more letters, I told Morris and Austin if they did not allow this matter to be arbitrated, so it would not create further dissension and confusion, and so that behind the scenes accusations against me and my associates would cease, I would make the issue public. They reluctantly agreed, but in various ways, Morris and Austin thwarted all efforts to seek arbitration. For example, after consulting with their lawyer, and only 4 days before the arbitration was to take place, they backed out of their written agreement to arbitrate and announced that they would participate only in non-binding arbitration. I bet that word is non-binding mediation. That's what it's going to be. Non-binding mediation. Arbitration is binding. After months of effort and having finally reached agreement on the time, place, and arbitrator, I felt betrayed. With plain reservations made and all the preparations in place, I decided to proceed anyway, hoping mediation would produce an agreement. The mediation took place on June 21st, 1994. However, by September 28th, 1994, Austin had clearly broken even the agreement we signed at the mediation. As a reading of our correspondence will show, I also wrote everyone involved that Austin had broken the agreement. As of this writing, 2008, misinformation is still coming out of ICR. Therefore, to answer questions from those now hearing this misinformation, the entire matter will be placed on the table for anyone to examine. People can reach their own conclusions. Notice I have followed the procedure laid out in Matthew 18. First, privately seek to the party you believe acted wrongly. Second, if he denies the allegations, present 1 or 2 witnesses to verify those allegations. Third, if that does not produce change, tell the church. I'm now telling the church, the body of believers, anyone wishing to receive a free CD-ROM. Okay, well, you can get all of these at hydroplate.org. That's where we're getting them right now. Some may wonder why Austin and I have never worked together. My first attempt toward that end was in the summer of 1976. I flew to ICR in San Diego in part to meet a Stuart E. Nevins. At the time, I did not know that Austin had been writing under that fictitious name to conceal his identity as a creationist. At lunch with Henry Morris, I said I'd like to meet Stuart Nevins. Morris, hiding the true situation, simply said that Nevis was out of town. Yeah, what was that name? Stuart E. Nevins. That'd be a good question to ask sometime. Okay. In 1980, I flew to ICR for a series of meetings with its leadership. In an informal gathering, a person asked me to explain the hydroplate theory to those standing around. I declined, saying I could not explain it in the brief time available. The group urged me to do so anyway. I again declined. Austin then walked in and also urged me to explain it, saying that he knew all the ideas about the flood and would quickly recognize what I had in mind. I began, but had completed only a few sentences when Austin interrupted to tell the group a related story. A minute or two later, he stopped talking and excused himself to catch his ride home. Our gathering dispersed. In March 1981, an acquaintance of Austin's had just attended a full-day seminar I conducted in Chicago. Afterward, he called Austin and urged him to learn about the hydroplate theory. Austin's response was simply, "I wish those non-geologists would stay out of our business." Later, on 2 occasions, I related this to Austin, but heard no denial or retraction, only silence. Since 1984, false comments, derogatory letters, and negative innuendos about me have periodically come from ICR. Most recently, ICR has written that the hydroplate theory is laughable. The specifics of these comments shown that the writers have not read the hydroplate theory. On several occasions, I offered to debate the scientific merits of our respective understandings of the flood, but ICR always declines. One simple, quick format that is explained in what is the recorded and transcribed telephone debate offer on page 431. Another format would have a panel of independent experts from a variety of relevant fields examine the hydroplate theory and the two flood theories that ICR has advanced. The canopy theory since 1972, and the catastrophic plate tectonics theory since 1994. Each expert's 1 to 2 page conclusion could then be published in one of several journals. Again, ICR declines. My debate offer still stands. So that's Walt Brown's perspective back in 1988 or 2008, I believe that was. Let's go way to the top. End notes 2000. Yeah, end notes 2008, Monday, December 1st, 2008. Okay, moving on here. Let's see what's going to be the next thing we talk about. If this is in order, Henry Morris's correspondence. Let's see what that. August 7th, 2009. Well, that'll be interesting. Henry Morris wants to step up. Well, good. I'm glad they're discussing it. Let's move out of this. Okay. Well, there you have it. So there's the Walt Brown's interpretation of the plagiarism controversy that he penned in, I think it was 2008. That's an excerpt from his book. And so the saga continues, and it's just a tragedy that they haven't been able to work together and have, I mean, could you imagine Walt's gift of research and ICR's and AIG's experts in marketing and getting the word out there? What could have accomplished these last few decades with a theory that makes accurate predictions and AIG and ICR's blowhorns or bullhorns? Couldn't just imagine that, but they weren't able to work together. And that's why we're making these videos right now, to hopefully smooth this over, because there is a theory that makes accurate predictions and it's being ignored right now. It should be front and center in the creation movements. And so we're asking for maturity. There's 3 stages of maturity. 1 is dependence, 2 is independence, and 3 is interdependence. And we'd like these people to work together so that this theory that explains 25 major features on Earth and in the solar system, plus makes astoundingly accurate predictions and is being validated by NASA discoveries, will be discussed and not ignored. That's why we're putting all this time and effort in there. We're putting this all out on the table so you can get all the information. I mean, could somebody please explain to me why a theory that's making accurate predictions is not being discussed? Okay. All right, so let's see the comments. Okay, and feel free to comment with things there. And so basically this has to be a grassroots movement right now, because clearly the people on top don't want things to change, or there could be people on top who want things to change, but there's resistance in their organizations. So we need the grassroots to start clamoring for this, start asking questions. What predictions does your theory make? Whenever if you're a creation speaker and they have Q&A, hey, what predictions does catastrophic plate tectonics make? What biblical support separates it from other models? And why aren't we looking? What do you think of the hydroplate? Can people support the hydroplate and not be blackballed in your organization? Those are some good questions to ask. And with that, we're going to shut her down, and we'll start up in about 5 minutes, taking a look at what Henry Morris has to say. So this is quite the journey.